The autumn wind cut through the narrow high street of Ashbourne like a blade, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of an early winter. It was the kind of cold that settled into your bones and made even the shortest walk feel like an ordeal. The small market town in Derbyshire had seen better days. Many of the shops that had once thrived here now bore "To Let" signs in their dusty windows, casualties of changing times and online shopping. But Fenwick & Sons remained, as it had for 3 generations. The small general store occupied a corner position on Market Street, its green-painted facade and hand-lettered sign a stubborn reminder of when local businesses were the heart of every community. Isolder Fenwick, 62 years old and fiercely protective of the legacy her grandfather had built, unlocked the shop door at precisely 8 o'clock every morning, just as she had done for the past 23 years. This particular Tuesday morning, however, was different. As Isolder arranged the morning newspapers in their rack by the door, she noticed him again, the man who had been appearing outside her shop with increasing frequency over the past 2 weeks. Rowan Mather sat on the cold pavement beside her doorway, his back pressed against the brick wall for what little shelter it provided. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 45, but the streets had aged him prematurely. His clothes were clean but worn, jeans with patches at the knees, a threadbare jumper that had once been blue, and canvas shoes that offered little protection against the October chill. What struck Isolder most about Rowan wasn't his obvious poverty, but his dignity. He didn't call out to passers-by or rattle coins in a cup. Instead, he sat quietly with a small cardboard sign that simply read, "Anything helps. Thank you." His hands were cupped gently in his lap, and he met the eyes of anyone who looked his way with a nod of acknowledgement that was both hopeful and resigned. The morning rush began as Ashbourne came to life. School children hurried past on their way to lessons, their chatter creating brief pockets of warmth in the cold air. Commuters grabbed quick coffees and newspapers before catching buses to Derby or Burton-upon-Trent. Elderly residents moved more slowly, some using walking sticks or wheeled shopping trolleys, taking their time to examine shop windows and exchange pleasantries with neighbours. But for Rowan Mather, it was as if he existed in a different dimension. Person after person walked past without acknowledgement, their eyes sliding over him as if he were part of the architecture. Some actively avoided looking in his direction, pulling out phones or suddenly becoming fascinated by something across the street. Others glanced briefly before quickening their pace, their discomfort evident in the tightness around their eyes. Mrs. Dorothy Hartwell, 83 and a customer of Fenwick & Sons since 1967, paused at the shop entrance, her wheeled basket clattering behind her. She looked down at Rowan with a mixture of pity and disapproval. "Isolder, dear," she said loudly enough for everyone within earshot to hear, "surely something can be done about this situation. It's not right, having beggars outside decent establishments. What will visitors think?" Rowan's face flushed with shame, but he said nothing. His hands tightened slightly in his lap, the only sign that the words had landed like physical blows. Isolder felt torn between her long-time customers' concerns and her own growing sympathy for the quiet man who had never once caused any trouble. "He's not bothering anyone, Mrs. Hartwell," she said diplomatically, "and it's a public pavement." "Well, I suppose," Mrs. Hartwell sniffed, "but in my day people had more pride than to sit begging in the street. There are proper channels for help, aren't there? Social services and whatnot." Her words carried clearly to Rowan, who seemed to shrink further into himself. This was the daily humiliation he endured, not just being ignored, but being discussed as if he weren't there. His humanity diminished to a social problem that needed solving or moving along. Young Corin Latchford, 17 and armed with the social media instincts of his generation, had been watching this scene unfold from the bus stop across the street. A college student with a part-time job at the local supermarket, Corin had noticed Rowan's regular presence and had been wrestling with whether to do something about it. He had $3.47 in his pocket, not much, but something. Yet every time he thought about approaching the man, something held him back. What if Rowan was dangerous? What if he was a fraud? What if helping him somehow made things worse? These were the questions that plagued most passers-by, the mental calculations that allowed decent people to walk past human suffering with clear consciences. It was easier to assume that someone else would help, that there were systems in place, that individual actions wouldn't make a difference anyway. As the morning wore on, Rowan's situation became increasingly desperate. The wind picked up, sending crisp packets and leaves skittering across the pavement. His thin jumper provided little protection against the cold, and Isolder could see him shivering despite his efforts to remain still and unobtrusive. Euan Tregarth, a local accountant in his 50s, emerged from the shop with his morning paper tucked under his arm. He had been coming to Fenwick & Sons for 15 years and prided himself on being a pillar of the community, chairman of the parish council, member of the local history society, regular churchgoer. But when he saw Rowan sitting in the cold, his first instinct wasn't compassion but irritation. "It's getting to be a real problem, this," he said to Isolder, loud enough for Rowan to hear. "Drives customers away, it does. People don't want to be confronted with this sort of thing when they're just trying to go about their business." "He's not confronting anyone," Isolder replied, her voice carrying a slight edge. "He's just sitting there quietly." "Still," Euan persisted, "there are proper places for people like him. Shelters, benefit offices. No need for him to be cluttering up the high street." The casual cruelty of referring to a human being as clutter wasn't lost on anyone present, least of all Rowan himself. He had heard these conversations countless times, people discussing him as if he were a piece of debris that needed clearing away, rather than a person deserving of basic dignity. But Rowan remained silent as he always did. Experience had taught him that defending himself only made things worse, that any sign of anger or frustration would be used as evidence that he was undeserving of help or sympathy. So he sat in his imposed invisibility, counting the coins that occasionally found their way into his cupped hands. 37 pence so far today, enough for a cup of tea but not much else. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was begging outside a shop that sold warm food, hot drinks and newspapers full of stories about government programs designed to help people in his situation. But the gap between policy and reality was vast, filled with bureaucratic delays, impossible requirements and a benefit system that seemed designed more to discourage claims than to provide genuine assistance. What the passing crowd couldn't know from their brief glimpses of a man reduced to asking for spare change, was that Rowan Mather had once been like them. He had worked in manufacturing for 18 years, owned a small flat, paid his taxes, worried about ordinary things like mortgage payments and holiday plans. The economic downturn, a factory closure, a period of unemployment that stretched longer than anyone expected, a minor health issue that became major when he couldn't afford proper treatment, these dominoes had fallen in sequence, each one making the next more inevitable. Now 3 years after losing his flat and 18 months since his last proper job, Rowan existed in the spaces between society's safety nets. Too proud to steal, too honest to lie about his circumstances, too exhausted to navigate systems that seemed designed to wear down applicants, he had found himself here, on this cold pavement, reduced to hoping for the casual kindness of strangers. As the morning progressed toward noon, the foot traffic on Market Street began to thin. Rowan had collected 1.23, enough for a cheap sandwich, but not enough for somewhere warm to eat it. His fingers were numb now, and he could feel the cold seeping through his thin clothes. But still he remained patient and dignified, holding on to the hope that someone might see him, not as a problem to be solved or ignored, but as a fellow human being deserving of basic compassion. It was then, as the clock above the old Methodist church struck 12, that a shadow fell across the pavement in front of him. Rowan looked up to see a figure that seemed impossibly tall against the grey sky, a man whose presence somehow commanded attention, even in this small market town, where nothing much ever happened. The figure stopped walking and stood perfectly still, looking down at Rowan with an expression that seemed to contain both recognition and something else, something that looked remarkably like understanding. And in that moment, everything was about to change. Tyson Fury had been walking through Ashbourne as part of his regular training routine, preferring the quiet streets of small market towns to the chaos of Manchester city centre. At 6 feet 9 inches, he was impossible to miss, but in his simple tracksuit and beanie pulled low, he had hoped to move through the town without attracting too much attention. It was a futile hope. His size alone made anonymity impossible, but the people of Ashbourne were generally respectful of privacy, content to whisper among themselves rather than approach him directly. He had been thinking about his upcoming family obligations, the balance between public appearances and private time, when something made him slow his pace and then stop entirely. There, beside the entrance to a small general store, sat a man who might have been invisible to everyone else, but who commanded Tyson's immediate and complete attention. It wasn't just the sight of someone in obvious need, though that would have been enough. It was something in the man's posture, the careful way he held himself despite his circumstances, that spoke to something deep in Tyson's memory. He recognized the dignity maintained in the face of desperation, the quiet pride that refused to be entirely broken, even by the worst circumstances life could offer. Rowan looked up as the shadow fell across him, expecting to see another passerby who would glance down briefly before continuing on their way. Instead, he found himself looking into the face of someone whose expression held no judgment, no discomfort, no hurried desire to be somewhere else. Just steady, thoughtful attention. "All right, mate," Tyson said simply, his voice carrying the warm Mancunian accent that had become familiar to millions through television interviews and press conferences. The greeting was so ordinary, so devoid of the careful distance that most people maintained, that Rowan was momentarily speechless. When had someone last looked at him and simply asked how he was, as if his answer actually mattered? Yes, I'm all right," Rowan replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. "Thank you for asking." Tyson crouched down, bringing himself closer to Rowan's eye level despite the cold pavement and his expensive trainers. The gesture was unconscious but profound, a physical demonstration that he saw Rowan as an equal worthy of conversation, rather than charity to be dispensed from above. "What's your name?" Tyson asked. "Rowan," came the slightly hesitant reply. "Rowan Mather. Nice to meet you, Rowan. I'm Tyson." He extended his hand as if they were meeting at a business conference, rather than on a street corner, where one of them was begging for coins. Rowan shook the offered hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard training and honest work. There was something surreal about the normalcy of the interaction, the way this giant of a man was treating him like a person rather than a problem. "Been here long today?" Tyson asked, settling more comfortably into his crouch as if he had all the time in the world. "Since about 8 this morning," Rowan admitted. "It's been quiet." Tyson nodded, understanding the euphemism. Cold day for it. They all are this time of year. From across the street, Corin Latchford watched this interaction with growing amazement. He recognized Tyson Fury now, not just the physical presence but the unmistakable way he carried himself. But what struck Corin wasn't the celebrity spotting. It was the complete absence of performance in Tyson's manner. This wasn't someone stopping for a quick photo opportunity or a public relations moment. This was genuine human connection happening in broad daylight on Market Street. Inside the shop, Isolder Fenwick found herself watching through the window as well. She had served hundreds of customers over the years, developed a sense for reading people and their motivations. What she was witnessing looked like simple decency in action. No cameras, no audience, just one person taking time to see another. "How long have you been?" Tyson paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound clinical or judgmental. "How long have you been on the streets?" Rowan considered the question, surprised by its directness and the lack of accusation in Tyson's voice. "About 18 months, he said quietly. "Lost my job, then my flat. Couldn't get back on my feet fast enough." "What kind of work did you do?" "Manufacturing. Factory work mostly. 18 years at the same place before they closed down." Tyson nodded thoughtfully. The story was familiar. He had heard variations of it countless times from people in his own community. Economic changes that left decent, hard-working people behind. Safety nets that couldn't catch everyone who fell through them. "Any family around here?" Tyson asked. Rowan's expression tightened slightly. "She had a sister, but she's got her own troubles. 3 kids, husband laid off last year. Can't expect her to take on my problems, too." The conversation was drawing attention now. Euan Tregarth, who had been about to leave the area, found himself lingering near his car, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. This wasn't how these situations were supposed to go. The celebrity was supposed to drop some coins and move on, not settle in for an extended conversation that treated the beggar like an actual person. "Have you eaten today?" Tyson asked. Rowan hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet, hoping to get enough for something later." Tyson glanced toward the shop where Isolder was still watching from behind the window. "What do you usually get when you have enough?" "Sometimes a sandwich from the cafe down the street. Cup of tea if I'm lucky." "Nothing fancy. What would you get if you could have anything?" The question seemed to puzzle Rowan. "Anything." "Yeah. If money wasn't an issue, what would make you feel better right now?" Rowan thought about it seriously, as if the question deserved consideration rather than dismissal. "Something hot," he said eventually, "and maybe something dry to wear. This jumper's not doing much good anymore." Tyson stood up, his full height once again commanding attention from everyone within sight. "Rowan, I want you to stay right here for a few minutes, all right? Don't go anywhere." All right," Rowan agreed, though he looked puzzled by the request. Tyson walked into Fenwick & Sons, the bell above the door chiming his arrival. Isolder looked up from the counter, where she had been pretending to reorganize stock while actually watching the conversation outside. "Afternoon," Tyson said with the same easy manner he had shown to Rowan. "I need some help with something." "Of course," Isolder replied, studying his face. Up close, she could see the sincerity that had been evident in his interaction with Rowan. "What can I do for you?" "That man outside. Rowan, he's been here before?" Nearly every day for the past 2 weeks, Isolder confirmed. Never causes any trouble, never bothers anyone, just sits there quietly. Has anyone helped him? Talked to him? Isolder shook her head sadly. Most people pretend they don't see him. Some complain about him being there, but no one's actually tried to help. Tyson nodded, processing this information. Right. I need to buy some things, but I need to know what you've got that might help someone in his situation. What do you mean? Warm clothes, food that'll stick to his ribs, maybe something waterproof? What can you do for someone who's living rough? Isolder's expression brightened with understanding. I've got some work jackets that are lined and waterproof, thermal socks, warm gloves, and there's proper food. Soup that heats up, bread, tinned goods. Show me everything you've got. For the next 10 minutes, Isolder guided Tyson through the shop, pointing out items that could make a real difference to someone facing the streets. Tyson selected a heavy work jacket in Rowan's size, thermal gloves, thick socks, a knit cap, and enough food to last several days. He added a thermos for hot drinks and a small camping blanket that folded into a compact bundle. That's quite a lot, Isolder observed as she rang up the items. Very generous of you. It's not generosity, Tyson replied, surprising her with the firmness of his response. It's just what you do when you see someone who needs help and you're in a position to provide it. Outside, the small crowd that had been watching the interaction was growing larger. Corin Latchford had crossed the street and was now close enough to hear any conversation that might take place. Euan Tregarth remained by his car, no longer pretending to have anywhere else to be. Even Mrs. Hartwell had returned, her earlier complaints seemingly forgotten in the face of whatever was about to happen. As Tyson emerged from the shop carrying several bags, Rowan looked up with an expression of confused hope. The kindness of their conversation had already been more than he had experienced in months. Whatever came next felt like an unexpected gift, but what Tyson did next would exceed everyone's expectations and create a moment that would be remembered long after the autumn chill had given way to winter's full embrace. The small crowd that had gathered on Market Street watched in fascination as Tyson Fury approached Rowan Mather with several bags from Fenwick & Sons. There was something electric in the air, a sense that whatever was about to happen would be significant enough to remember and retell for years to come. Tyson knelt beside Rowan again, setting the bags down carefully on the pavement. "Right then, mate," he said with the same easy tone he had maintained throughout their conversation. "I got you a few things." He began unpacking the items one by one, explaining each as he went. "This jacket's waterproof and lined with fleece. Should keep you warmer than what you're wearing now." He held up the heavy work coat, dark navy with reflective strips and multiple pockets. "And these gloves are thermal, proper ones, not the thin things that don't do much good." Rowan stared at the items being laid out before him, his eyes widening with each addition. I can't accept all this," he stammered. "It's too much." "Course you can," Tyson replied matter-of-factly. "It's cold. You need warm things. Simple as that." He continued unpacking. "Got you some proper food, too. Soup that heats up, bread, some tinned bits that'll stick to your ribs, and this thermos. You can get hot tea or coffee, and it'll stay warm for hours." By now, Corin Latchford had his phone out, not for a selfie or to boast about witnessing a celebrity encounter, but because he recognized that he was watching something genuinely important happen. His finger hovered over the record button as he struggled with the ethics of filming such a private moment. But something told him this story needed to be shared, not for entertainment, but for the example it set. Euan Tregarth found himself reconsidering every assumption he had made about Rowan that morning. Watching someone he now recognized as one of Britain's most famous athletes treat this homeless man with such obvious respect and care was forcing him to examine his own attitudes and responses. "Here's the thing, Rowan," Tyson said as he finished unpacking. "This isn't charity, right? This is just what people should do for each other. You'd do the same if our situations were reversed, wouldn't you?" Rowan nodded slowly, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "I would. Of course I would." "Right then. So this is just evening things out a bit." Tyson helped Rowan into the new jacket, the transformation immediate and striking. Where before there had been a man diminished by circumstances, there was now someone who looked prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The jacket fit well, and its quality was obvious even to casual observers. "Better?" Tyson asked. "Much better," Rowan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. Don't need to thank me. But I will tell you something. This town's lucky to have you in it." The statement surprised everyone within earshot, including Rowan himself. "Lucky to have me? Absolutely. Takes courage to ask for help when you need it. Takes dignity to do it the way you've been doing it, quietly, respectfully, not bothering anyone, and it takes character to maintain your dignity when people treat you like you're invisible. Tyson's words carried clearly in the crisp air, reaching not just Rowan but everyone who had gathered to watch. Corin made his decision and began recording, understanding that this message needed to be preserved and shared. "You know what I see when I look at you," Tyson continued. "I see someone who's going through a rough patch but hasn't given up. Someone who's facing difficult circumstances but doing it with grace. That's admirable, mate. That's the kind of person any community should be proud to help." Mrs. Hartwell, who had been listening from a short distance away, felt something shift in her chest. Her earlier complaints about Rowan's presence seemed petty and cruel in retrospect. Here was someone she had written off as a nuisance, being treated with the kind of respect she would want for herself if their positions were reversed. "I used to have a job," Rowan said quietly, as if confessing to a crime. "Worked for 18 years at the same factory. Paid my taxes, had my own place." "I'm sure you did," Tyson replied, "and you'll have those things again. This isn't permanent, Rowan. This is just where you are right now, not where you'll always be." The conversation was drawing people from up and down the street now. Shopkeepers stepped out of their doorways, pedestrians slowed their pace, and the gathering crowd began to represent a cross-section of Ashbourne's community. What they were witnessing was more than just a celebrity giving gifts to a homeless man. It was a demonstration of human dignity being recognized and honored. Isolder Fenwick emerged from her shop, unable to remain inside while something so significant was happening on her doorstep. She approached the pair with a thermos of hot tea from her own supply. "Thought you might like something warm to go with all that," she said to Rowan, offering him the thermos with a smile that held genuine warmth rather than the careful politeness she had shown before. "That's very kind of you," Rowan replied, accepting the tea with hands that were already warmer thanks to his new gloves. "It's the least I can do," Isolder said, and meant it. "I should have done something sooner." Her admission seemed to open a floodgate. Euan Tregarth approached the group, his earlier irritation replaced by something approaching shame. "I owe you an apology," he said to Rowan. "What I said earlier, about you being a problem, that was wrong of me. Completely wrong." Rowan looked up at him with surprise. "You don't need to apologize." "I do, actually. I made assumptions about you based on your circumstances rather than your character. That says more about my failings than yours." The crowd had grown to perhaps 20 people now, a significant gathering for a small market town on a Tuesday afternoon. But there was nothing sensational about the atmosphere, just a sense of witnessing something important, something that challenged everyone present to consider how they treated the most vulnerable members of their community. Corin continued recording, capturing not just the initial interaction, but the ripple effect it was having on everyone who witnessed it. This wasn't planned or staged. It was genuine human connection spreading from person to person, like warmth from a fire. "Right then," Tyson said, standing up and preparing to continue his walk. "Rowan, you take care of yourself. And remember what I said. This is temporary. You've got the strength to get through it." "Thank you," Rowan said, the words encompassing more than just the material gifts. "For everything, for seeing me." Tyson nodded and began to walk away, but he had only taken a few steps when Mrs. Hartwell's voice stopped him. "Excuse me," she called out. "Young man, Mr. Fury." Tyson turned back, curious about what the elderly woman wanted to say. "I want you to know," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp air, "that what you've done here today, it's changed how I see things, how I see people like Rowan. You've made me ashamed of my earlier comments, and you've made me want to do better." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered crowd. Other people began to step forward, offering Rowan small gifts of their own, coins, food, words of encouragement that acknowledged his humanity rather than simply his need. Corin stopped recording and approached Rowan directly. "Would it be all right if I shared this video?" he asked. "I think people need to see what happened here today." Rowan considered the question carefully. "If you think it might help other people, then yes. But not to make me feel sorry for myself, to show that there are still good people in the world." "That's exactly what it shows," Corin assured him. Within hours, Corin's video had been shared thousands of times across social media platforms, but unlike many viral videos, this one sparked not cynicism or judgment, but genuine reflection about how communities treat their most vulnerable members. Comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of hardship, their own experiences of being helped by strangers, their own commitments to pay attention to people they might previously have overlooked. The video captured not just Tyson's generosity, but the transformation it sparked in everyone who witnessed it. It showed how one person's decision to act with kindness and dignity could ripple outward, changing not just the recipient of that kindness, but everyone who observed it. Back on Market Street, Rowan Mather sat with his new jacket keeping him warm, his thermos full of hot tea, and a small pile of additional gifts from people who had been moved by what they had witnessed. For the first time in months, he felt not just physically warmer but spiritually restored, reminded that he was still a person worthy of respect and kindness. As evening approached and the streets began to empty, Isolder Fenwick locked up her shop and approached Rowan one more time. "Listen," she said, "I close up every evening at 6. If you need somewhere warm to sit for a while, somewhere to heat up some of that soup, you're welcome to come in. It's not much, but it's better than the street." Rowan looked up at her with gratitude that went beyond words. "That's incredibly kind of you." "It's what neighbors do for each other," Isolder replied simply, "and you're part of this community now, whether you have an address or not." As Rowan gathered his new possessions and prepared to find shelter for the night, he reflected on the extraordinary events of the day. A chance encounter with a stranger had not only provided him with material help, but had restored something more valuable, his sense of belonging to the human community. The video of Tyson Fury's gesture would continue to spread, inspiring countless other acts of kindness and challenging viewers to examine their own responses to people in need. But for Rowan Mather, the impact was immediate and personal. He had been seen, acknowledged, and treated with dignity by someone who had no obligation to notice him at all. And in that recognition lay the seed of hope that would eventually help him find his way back to stability, back to purpose, back to the kind of life he had once taken for granted but would never again fail to appreciate. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest gestures: a conversation, a moment of genuine attention, the willingness to see another person's humanity despite their circumstances. On a cold Tuesday afternoon in Ashbourne, Tyson Fury had demonstrated that simple truth, and the ripples of his kindness would continue spreading long after he had disappeared around the corner and resumed his walk through the quiet streets of a small market town that had just learned something important about itself.